Dawn breaks over the endless plains of ancient China, and the world is heavy with the scent of dew, smoke, and anticipation. The mist clings to the earth, swirling around the feet of warriors who stand ready, their breath visible in the cold morning air. The clang of bronze weapons echoes across the fields, and the distant sound of drums signals that today, history will be written in blood. This is not the China of emperors and silk roads, but a land divided. Dozens of clans and city-states, each ruled by ambitious lords, each vying for power, territory, and the favor of the gods. The rivers are lifelines, but also borders. The mountains are both barriers and sanctuaries. And in the hearts of men, fear and hope wage their own silent war. From the perspective of a young foot soldier, the world is chaos. He grips his bronze-tipped spear, hands trembling, eyes darting between the banners of his clan and the distant, shimmering line of the enemy. He remembers the stories told by his elders, of dragons in the clouds, of ancestors watching from the stars, of prophecies whispered by shamans in the dead of night. But now, all that matters is survival. The first great wars of ancient China were not fought for glory alone. They were battles for existence, for the right to shape the destiny of a land still wild and untamed. The Shang, a rising power from the east, brought with them new weapons, chariots, and the art of bronze casting. Their warriors wore armor that gleamed in the sun. Their generals rode at the front, and their priests called upon the spirits for victory. Opposing them were the lords of the West, the proto-Zhou, fierce and cunning, masters of the horse and the bow. They believed their destiny was written in the stars, that the mandate of heaven could shift with the tides of war. Their shamans read omens in the flight of birds and the cracks in turtle shells, searching for signs that would tip the balance. The clash was inevitable. On the banks of the Yellow River, armies gathered, thousands of men, chariots, and horses, banners snapping in the wind. The air was thick with tension, the ground trembling beneath the weight of anticipation. As the sun rose, the signal was given, and the two forces surged forward, a tidal wave of bronze and fury. From the general's vantage point, the battlefield is a living thing. He shouts orders, his voice barely audible above the roar of combat. Arrows darken the sky, chariots crash through enemy lines, and the screams of the wounded mingle with the clash of metal. The general knows that victory will not come from strength alone, but from cunning, feints, ambushes, and the careful reading of the enemy's intent. In the chaos, legends are born. A young warrior, barely more than a boy, stands his ground against a charging chariot, his spear finding its mark. A shaman, eyes rolled back in trance, calls down a sudden storm that blinds the enemy and turns the tide. A noblewoman, disguised as a soldier, rallies the fleeing with a cry that echoes across the plain. But war is not only glory. It is loss, fear, and the ever-present shadow of betrayal. In the dead of night, spies slip between camps, carrying secrets and false promises. Alliances shift like sand, and the line between friend and foe blurs. The gods themselves seem fickle, one day granting victory, the next demanding sacrifice. As the battles rage, the Shang begin to assert their dominance. Their mastery of bronze gives them an edge. Their rituals bind the spirits to their cause, and their kings claim the mandate of heaven. Yet the Zhou do not yield. They retreat into the mountains, regroup, and strike back with guerrilla tactics, harassing supply lines and sowing confusion. The war becomes a test of endurance. Fields are burned, villages abandoned, and the land itself seems to cry out for peace. Yet, neither side will surrender. The stakes are too high. The future of China hangs in the balance, and every warrior knows that his actions will echo through the ages. In the midst of this chaos, prophecies circulate. Some say a child born under a blood-red moon will unite the clans. Others whisper that the dragons have chosen their champion, and that the outcome of the war is already written in the stars. Priests and shamans compete for influence, offering visions and warnings, their words shaping the hopes and fears of kings and commoners alike. As the dust settles after each battle, the survivors count their losses and prepare for the next clash. The rivers run red, the fields are littered with the fallen, and the fires of war burn ever brighter. Yet, in the hearts of the people, a new idea begins to take root. The dream of unity, of a land no longer torn by endless conflict, but ruled by a single, just hand. But that dream is still far away. For now, the drums of war continue to beat, and the fate of ancient China remains uncertain, suspended between prophecy and bloodshed, hope and despair. The nights are long and filled with stories. Around the campfires, warriors whisper of omens seen in the sky, comets blazing, stars falling, the moon turning red. Some believe these are signs from the ancestors. Others see them as warnings of doom. In the darkness, shamans perform secret rites, burning incense and chanting to the spirits, seeking guidance for the battles to come. Meanwhile, in the courts of kings, intrigue festers. Ambitious lords plot alliances and betrayals, sending envoys with gifts and threats. The Shang king consults his oracles, breaking turtle shells and reading the cracks for messages from the gods. The Zhou leaders, hardened by defeat, forge new weapons and train their warriors in the art of surprise attack. Every decision, every sacrifice, is weighed against the uncertain promise of victory. The land itself bears the scars of war. Once fertile fields are trampled and scorched, villages stand empty, their people scattered or enslaved. The rivers, lifeblood of the land, run thick with silt and blood. Yet, even in the midst of devastation, life persists. Children are born, elders tell stories, and the hope for a better future flickers in the hearts of the survivors. As the seasons turn, the conflict deepens. The Shang launch a massive offensive, their chariots thundering across the plains, their warriors chanting the names of their ancestors. The Zhou, outnumbered but unbroken, strike from the shadows, ambushing supply trains and sabotaging enemy camps. The war becomes a dance of shadows and fire, a contest not just of strength, but of will and cunning. In the quiet moments between battles, the soldiers dream of home, of green fields, of family, of peace. But the reality is harsh. Disease spreads through the camps, food grows scarce, and the constant threat of death hangs over every man and woman. Yet, the promise of glory, of a place in the songs of future generations, drives them onward. And so, the great war of ancient China grinds on, shaping the destiny of a civilization. The outcome is uncertain, the cost unimaginable, but one thing is clear: the world will never be the same. The fires of conflict forge new heroes and villains, new legends and nightmares, and the echoes of their deeds will resound through the ages. As dawn breaks once more over the blood-soaked fields, the warriors of Shang and Zhou steel themselves for another day of battle, their hearts heavy with fear and hope. Somewhere, in the swirling mists, the dragons watch and wait, their secrets hidden, their power undiminished. The fate of China hangs in the balance, and the greatest stories are yet to be told. Night falls over the battered plains of ancient China, and the fires of war flicker against the darkness. The air is thick with the scent of blood, sweat, and burnt earth. In the distance, the cries of the wounded mingle with the low, mournful notes of war drums. For those who survive, each night is a test of endurance, a time to count the dead, tend to wounds, and whisper prayers to ancestors and gods alike. In the Shang camp, the king sits in his ornate tent, surrounded by generals and priests. The flickering lamplight casts monstrous shadows on the silk walls. The king's face is a mask of resolve, but his eyes betray exhaustion. He listens as his advisors debate the next move. Should they press the attack, risking everything in a single, decisive battle? Or should they wait, letting hunger and fear weaken the enemy? The priests urge caution, reading omens in the cracks of turtle shells and the flight of night birds. The generals, hungry for glory, demand action. Meanwhile, in the Zhou camp, the mood is tense but defiant. The Zhou leader, battered but unbowed, gathers his warriors around a smoky fire. He speaks not of defeat, but of destiny. The mandate of heaven is not given. It is earned, he tells them. We fight not just for ourselves, but for the future of all our people. His words kindle hope in weary hearts. The Zhou have lost much, but they have not lost their will to resist. Elsewhere, a shaman sits alone on a hill, eyes closed, listening to the wind. He feels the pulse of the earth, the restless spirits of the dead, the distant roar of dragons in the clouds. In his trance, he sees visions, cities in flames, rivers running red, a child crowned beneath a blood-red moon. He knows that the outcome of this war will shape the fate of China for centuries to come. As the days pass, the conflict grows ever more brutal. The Shang launch a series of relentless assaults, their chariots thundering across the plains, their warriors chanting the names of their ancestors. The Zhou, outnumbered and outgunned, rely on cunning and courage. They strike at night, sabotaging supply lines, ambushing patrols, and vanishing into the darkness before the enemy can retaliate. The land itself becomes a weapon. The Zhou poison wells, set traps in the forests, and use the rivers to flood Shang encampments. The Shang respond with terror, burning villages suspected of harboring Zhou sympathizers, taking hostages, and executing traitors. The cycle of violence spirals ever higher, and the people suffer most of all. In the midst of chaos, stories spread like wildfire. Some speak of a Zhou warrior who cannot be killed, his body protected by the spirits of his ancestors. Others tell of a Shang general who made a pact with a dragon, trading his soul for victory. These legends grow with each retelling, blurring the line between truth and myth, hope and fear. For the common people, survival is a daily struggle. Fields lie fallow, homes are abandoned, and families are torn apart by the tides of war. Yet, even in the darkest times, acts of kindness and courage shine through. A mother risks her life to smuggle food to starving soldiers. An old man hides wounded warriors in his cellar, nursing them back to health. Children, orphaned by the fighting, form their own small bands, scavenging for food and dreaming of peace. As the war drags on, both sides begin to feel the strain. Disease spreads through the camps, morale falters, and whispers of mutiny circulate among the ranks. The Shang king grows increasingly paranoid, seeing enemies everywhere. He orders purges, executing suspected traitors and rivals. The Zhou leader, too, faces dissent. Some of his lords question his strategy, others plot to seize power for themselves. Yet, in the midst of despair, a new hope emerges. Rumors spread of a prophecy, a child born under a blood-red moon, destined to unite the warring clans and bring peace to the land. Some say the child is already among them, hidden in plain sight. Others believe the prophecy is a lie, a tool to manipulate the desperate and the gullible. But for many, it is a beacon in the darkness, a reason to keep fighting when all seems lost. The seasons turn, and the war enters its most desperate phase. The Shang, determined to crush the Zhou once and for all, muster their full strength for a final assault. The Zhou, battered but unbroken, prepare for a last stand. The battlefield is set, a vast plain beneath a sky heavy with storm clouds. Both armies know that what happens here will decide the fate of China. As dawn breaks, the two forces face each other across the blood-soaked earth. The air is electric with tension, every warrior keenly aware that this day may be his last. The Shang king, clad in gleaming bronze, raises his sword and calls upon the spirits of his ancestors. The Zhou leader, his armor battered but his spirit unbroken, rallies his men with a cry that echoes across the plain. The battle begins with a thunderous charge, chariots racing forward, arrows flying, the clash of bronze on bronze ringing out like thunder. The ground shakes beneath the weight of thousands of warriors. The sky darkens as storm clouds gather. In the chaos, heroes rise and fall. A Zhou archer fells a Shang general with a single, impossible shot. A Shang charioteer breaks through the enemy lines, only to be brought down by a peasant wielding a farmer's scythe. The fighting is fierce and unrelenting. The rivers run red, the fields are trampled to mud, and the cries of the dying fill the air. Yet, even as the battle rages, the prophecy lingers in every mind. Who is the child of the blood-red moon? Will the dragons intervene? Is victory even possible, or is this the end of all things? As the sun sets, the outcome remains uncertain. Both armies are battered, both leaders wounded, and the land itself seems to mourn the endless cycle of violence. In the distance, lightning flashes, illuminating the faces of the survivors. Faces etched with exhaustion, fear, and a glimmer of hope. The war between Shang and Zhou is far from over. The fate of China hangs in the balance, suspended between prophecy and bloodshed, hope and despair. The next dawn will bring new challenges, new betrayals, and perhaps, at last, the fulfillment of ancient dreams. If you're fascinated by these epic battles, legendary heroes, and the mysteries that shaped the destiny of China, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next chapter of Kingdoms of Mystery. What do you think really happened on those ancient battlefields? Could a single prophecy change the fate of an entire civilization? Share your theories in the comments. And remember, history is written not just by the victors, but by those who dare to seek the truth. The greatest secrets of the past are still waiting to be discovered.